She was hired as the cleaner until she had to bathe the paralyzed billionaire. The water was warm against his skin, but his hands were shaking as she reached for him. "I haven't let anyone see me like this," he whispered, his voice cracking. Not since the accident. She should have walked away. Should have called his nurse. Should have done anything except what she did next. Because what happened in that bathroom would either be the most beautiful mistake of her life, or the most dangerous. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story. Because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. The ornate iron gates of the Davis estate stood like sentinels against the Seattle morning mist, their imposing presence a stark reminder of the world Alicia Brown was about to enter. She clutched her worn leather purse tighter, the employment contract folded neatly inside still feeling surreal. 3 months of unemployment had led to this moment. A cleaning position at one of Washington State's most exclusive properties. The mansion loomed before her, its Georgian architecture speaking of old money and older secrets. Towering columns supported a grand portico, while manicured gardens stretched endlessly toward the Puget Sound. Alicia had grown up in Tacoma's hilltop neighborhood, where houses were measured in square feet, not acres. This place was a different universe entirely. "Ms. Brown," a crisp voice cut through her reverie. Margaret Whitfield, the head housekeeper, stood in the doorway, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a perfect chignon and eyes that missed nothing. "You're punctual. Good." Alicia straightened her shoulders, smoothing down her modest black dress. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for this opportunity." Margaret's expression remained neutral as she led Alicia through the foyer. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic rainbows across marble floors, so polished they reflected like mirrors. Oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors watched from gilded frames, their eyes seeming to follow every step. "The Davis family has owned this estate for 3 generations, Margaret explained, her voice echoing in the vast space. "We maintain the highest standards here. Discretion is paramount." They passed through room after room, a library with floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, a dining room that could seat 20, sitting rooms adorned with priceless antiques. Each space was immaculate, museum quality, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Mr. Noah Davis is the current owner," Margaret continued, pausing at the foot of a sweeping staircase. "He's particular about his privacy. You'll be responsible for the East Wing cleaning rotation, bedrooms, bathrooms, and the study. Under no circumstances are you to disturb Mr. Davis or enter his private quarters without explicit permission." Something in Margaret's tone made Alicia's skin prickle. There was a weight to her words, an unspoken warning that suggested the mysterious Mr. Davis was more than just a reclusive billionaire. "I understand," Alicia replied, though curiosity flickered in her dark eyes. The East Wing revealed itself as equally opulent, but somehow more lived in. Books lay open on side tables, coffee cups bore the rings of frequent use, and in one study, papers scattered across a massive oak desk spoke of a working mind. This felt like someone's actual home, not just a showpiece. As Alicia began her work, she moved with practiced efficiency. Growing up as the eldest of 4 children to a single mother who worked 3 jobs, she'd learned early that attention to detail meant survival. Every surface gleamed under her careful ministrations, every corner freed of dust. It was while polishing the banister of the East Wing staircase that she first heard him. The sound drifted down from the upper floor, not quite singing, not quite humming, but something melodic and deeply melancholic. Alicia paused, her cloth stilling against the mahogany. The voice was rich, masculine, tinged with a sadness that seemed to seep through the walls themselves. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Alicia spun around to find Margaret watching her, an unreadable expression on her weathered face. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Mr. Davis was a concert pianist," Margaret said quietly, glancing toward the upper floor. "Before." The word hung in the air like a ghost. Before what? Alicia wanted to ask, but something in Margaret's demeanor warned against it. "Focus on your work, Ms. Brown." The Davis family values privacy above all else. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Alicia arrived at dawn, cleaned with meticulous care, and left before the afternoon staff arrived. She learned the mansion's moods, how the morning light transformed the cold marble into something almost warm, how shadows danced differently in each room, how silence could feel both peaceful and oppressive. And always, there was the music. Sometimes it was Chopin, melancholy nocturnes that seemed to weep through the walls. Other times, angry Rachmaninoff that made the very air vibrate with frustration. Occasionally, she'd catch fragments of something she didn't recognize. Original compositions, perhaps, born from whatever private torment haunted the mansion's mysterious owner. Alicia found herself timing her work to these musical interludes, creating her own soundtrack of discovery. She learned that the music meant Mr. Davis was awake, alert, feeling something. The silence, she began to understand, was far worse. 3 weeks into her employment, everything changed. She was cleaning the main bathroom of the East Wing, a palatial space with a sunken marble tub that could easily fit 4 people, when she heard it. Not music this time, but something else. A crash, followed by cursing that would make a sailor blush, followed by an even more concerning silence. Alicia stood frozen, cloth in hand, every instinct screaming at her to investigate. Margaret's warnings echoed in her mind, but beneath them rose something stronger. The voice of a woman who had spent her life taking care of others, who couldn't ignore the sound of someone in distress. The cursing resumed, accompanied by what sounded like objects being thrown. Before she could second-guess herself, Alicia was moving. She climbed the servants' staircase she'd discovered her first week. Narrow, hidden stairs that allowed staff to move unseen through the mansion. Her heart hammered as she reached the upper landing, following the sounds to a pair of ornate double doors. She knocked softly. "Hello. Is everything all right?" The noise stopped abruptly. "I said I don't need help." The voice was raw, angry, but underneath the fury, Alicia heard something else. Pain, frustration, and bone-deep exhaustion. "I know you did," she replied through the door, surprised by her own calm. "I'm not here because you need help. I'm here because I need to know you're not bleeding to death in there." A moment of silence. Then, unexpectedly, a short laugh, bitter but genuine. "And what exactly would you do if I were?" "Call 911 and probably save your life," Alicia said matter-of-factly. "I'm certified in first aid. Comes with having 3 younger siblings who thought they were invincible." Another pause. When the voice came again, it was quieter, less hostile. "I'm not bleeding." "Good. Are you hurt in any other way?" "That's complicated." Alicia pressed her palm against the cool wood of the door, imagining the man on the other side. In 3 weeks, she'd built an entire mythology around Noah Davis. Tortured artist, reclusive genius, broken soul making beautiful music from his pain. The reality was probably far more mundane, but something in his voice made her think perhaps it wasn't. "Most hurt is complicated," she said softly. "Doesn't make it less real." The silence stretched so long she wondered if he'd left the room. Then barely audible. "Who are you?" "Alicia Brown. I'm your new cleaner." "Alicia." He said her name like he was testing how it felt on his tongue. "That's a beautiful name." "Thank you. Though I should mention, I'm currently standing outside your door having a conversation with wood paneling, which probably violates at least 17 different employment policies." This time, his laugh was genuine, warm despite its brittle edges. "Probably 18, actually. Margaret takes the rules very seriously. So I've noticed. Should I go back to violating them quietly, or would you prefer I violate them loudly?" He seemed to struggle with something. "I haven't talked to anyone in weeks." "Not really talked." Alicia's heart clenched. She leaned her forehead against the door, suddenly understanding that the melancholy music wasn't artistic temperament. It was isolation, pure and simple. "Well," she said, settling more comfortably against the doorframe, "I've got about 20 minutes before Margaret makes her rounds. We could violate some policies together. What do you think Noah is hiding behind those doors? Share your thoughts about what kind of pain might be keeping this billionaire isolated from the world." And so, with a mahogany door between them and the Seattle rain beginning to pattern against tall windows. Two souls who had been carrying their burdens alone began the tentative process of setting them down together. The conversation through the mahogany door became a lifeline neither of them had expected. Over the following days, Alicia found herself gravitating toward those ornate double doors during her cleaning rounds. Sometimes Noah would be playing, fingers dancing across keys she couldn't see, creating melodies that seemed to paint emotions in the air. Other times, there would be silence, and she'd knock softly, offering fragments of her day like small gifts. "The roses in the East Garden are blooming," she'd say, or, "I found a first edition Langston Hughes in the library today. Someone's got good taste." He began responding, his voice growing less guarded with each exchange. She learned he'd graduated from Juilliard at 19, that he'd once performed at Carnegie Hall, that he'd traveled the world before whatever had brought him to this isolation. "What's your favorite piece to play?" she asked one Thursday morning, settling into what had become their routine. "Currently? Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor." His voice carried a wry note. "It matches my general disposition." "Ah, going for the full tortured artist vibe." "Something like that." A pause. "What about you? Any musical inclinations?" Alicia smiled, polishing the same section of banister for the third time. "I sing in my church choir when I can. Nothing fancy, but it fills something in me, you know." "I know exactly what you mean." The warmth in his voice made something flutter in her chest, a dangerous, beautiful something she tried to ignore. It was the following Tuesday when everything shifted. Alicia was organizing the linen closet when she heard the crash. Different from the usual sounds of frustration, this one sharp and followed by an immediate, pained cry. Her heart stopped. "Noah!" She was running before conscious thought kicked in, taking the servants' stairs two at a time. "Noah!" This time, she didn't pause at the door. The sound of genuine distress had shattered every protocol Margaret had drilled into her. She turned the handle, unlocked, thank God, and stepped into Noah Davis's private world. The room was magnificent, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound, a massive four-poster bed with midnight blue silk, and dominating one corner, a grand piano that looked like it cost more than her childhood home. But Alicia's attention fixed immediately on the man struggling on the floor beside an overturned wheelchair. Noah Davis was beautiful in the most heartbreaking way possible. Dark hair fell across a face that belonged on magazine covers. Strong jaw, expressive brown eyes currently tight with pain, and features that spoke of both privilege and suffering. But it was his position that made her heart clench. Sprawled awkwardly on Persian carpet, his legs twisted at unnatural angles, his lower body clearly beyond his control. "Don't," he said sharply when she moved toward him, but his voice cracked on the word. "Please, don't look at me like that." "Like what?" Alicia knelt beside him, automatically checking for obvious injuries. "Like I'm broken." She met his eyes, those beautiful brown eyes filled with shame and fury, and something that looked dangerously close to despair. "I'm looking at you like you're a person who needs help," she said quietly. "There's a difference." For a moment, they stared at each other. This close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the way his breath came shallow with embarrassment, the tremor in his hands that spoke of pride being systematically destroyed. "The transfer board," he said finally, gesturing weakly toward a piece of equipment near the bed. "I can get back in the chair if you can just position it." Alicia had helped her grandmother after her stroke. She understood the mechanics, if not the specifics. Working together, him directing, her providing the physical assistance, they managed to get him back into the wheelchair. His jaw stayed clenched the entire time, and she pretended not to notice the tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. "Thank you," he said once he was settled, but he wouldn't look at her. "How long?" she asked gently. 3 years. The words came out flat, lifeless. "Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light while I was walking to my car after a concert in downtown Seattle. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry." His voice turned bitter. "Sorry doesn't bring back sensation below my waist. Sorry doesn't give me back my career, my life, my—" He stopped abruptly, hands fisting in his lap. Alicia settled into the nearby armchair, uninvited, but unwilling to leave him alone with whatever demons were tearing at him. "What happened today?" she asked. "With the chair?" Noah's laugh was hollow. "Margaret had to leave early, family emergency. My nurse called in sick. I was trying to transfer to the bed myself, and—" He gestured at the scene they'd just navigated. 3 years, and I still can't manage the simplest tasks without help. That's not true, isn't it? His eyes flashed. I can't walk. Can't feel half my body. Can't even take a shower without assistance. Tell me how any of that isn't exactly what it looks like. Alicia was quiet for a moment, studying this man who'd been reduced to a voice through a door until 5 minutes ago. Now seeing him whole, seeing his pain, his pride, his devastating vulnerability, something shifted in her chest. "Can I tell you something about my brother Marcus?" she said finally. "I suppose. He was born with cerebral palsy. Mild, but enough that walking was hard, talking was harder. When we were kids, I used to watch him struggle with things that came easy to the rest of us, and I thought he was the bravest person I'd ever met." Noah's expression softened slightly. "One day, when he was about 12, he fell off his bike in front of some older kids who started laughing. When I ran over to help him up, he was crying, not from the scrapes, but from the humiliation. You know what he told me?" "What?" He said, "Alicia, I'm not brave. I'm just trapped in a body that won't do what I want, and I don't have a choice but to keep trying." She leaned forward. "That's not broken, Noah. That's human." Something cracked in his expression, a wall she hadn't even realized was there. "I used to perform for thousands of people," he whispered. "Now I can't even shower alone. When's the last time you tried?" The question seemed to surprise him. What do you mean? When's the last time you actually tried to shower? Not just accepted that you couldn't, but really tried. The bathroom's not equipped for. The one downstairs is." Alicia stood, mind racing. The main bathroom in the east wing. That sunken tub, the handheld shower attachment, the grab bars I noticed installed along the walls. Someone designed that space for accessibility. Noah stared at her. "My father had it modified after his stroke 10 years ago. But that doesn't mean I can. It means you can try." She moved to his wheelchair, hands resting lightly on the armrests. "I'm certified in personal care assistance. I helped with my grandmother for 2 years before she passed." "Absolutely not." The refusal was immediate, sharp. "Why?" "Because I won't be someone's charity case. I won't be pitied or—" "Who said anything about pity?" Alicia's voice carried an edge of impatience. "I'm talking about dignity. About you taking back some control, instead of sitting in this room feeling sorry for yourself." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Noah's eyes flashed with anger, then something else, something that looked like hunger. "You don't understand what you're suggesting." "I understand exactly what I'm suggesting." She met his gaze steadily. "The question is whether you're brave enough to let me help." The standoff stretched between them, tension crackling like electricity. Finally, Noah's shoulders sagged. "I haven't. No one has seen me like that. Not since the first months in the hospital." "I'm not no one," Alicia said softly. "I'm someone who cares about you." The admission surprised them both. When had that happened? When had the voice through the door become this vital, beautiful, broken man she wanted to help heal? "If we do this," Noah said slowly, "there are rules." "Okay. You don't look at me with pity. Not once." "Agreed. And if I tell you to stop, you stop. No arguments, no trying to convince me otherwise." "Of course." He studied her face as if trying to read her soul. Whatever he found there must have satisfied him, because he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "All right. But if this goes badly, if I humiliate myself completely, I'm firing you and never speaking to you again." Alicia smiled, the first real smile she'd given in his presence. "Fair enough. But if it goes well, you owe me dinner. I don't leave this house." "Who said anything about leaving?" The shocked look on his face told her he hadn't considered that possibility, that someone might want to share space with him not out of obligation, but choice. An hour later, they were in the main bathroom, and Alicia was reminded why she'd been so struck by the space during her first week. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, turning the marble surfaces warm and golden. The sunken tub was indeed massive, with a built-in bench and handholds positioned perfectly for someone with limited mobility. Noah sat in his wheelchair at the tub's edge, wearing only a towel around his waist, his knuckles white where he gripped the chair's armrests. The vulnerability in his posture, shoulders hunched, head down, made Alicia's heart ache. "Talk to me," she said quietly, adjusting the water temperature. "Tell me what you need." "I don't know." His voice was barely above a whisper. "It's been so long since I tried anything like this. Then we figure it out together." She knelt beside his chair, one hand resting gently on his arm. "Look at me, Noah." When he finally met her eyes, she saw fear there, not of falling or drowning, but of being seen as less than whole. "You are not broken," she said firmly. "You are not less than you were before. You are different, and that's not the same thing." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he'd built around himself. The transfer into the tub required trust from both of them. Alicia positioning herself to provide support, Noah allowing her to take some of his weight as they navigated the steps. When he was finally settled on the built-in bench, warm water lapping around his waist, the relief on his face was devastating. "Oh," he breathed, eyes closing. "I'd forgotten how good this feels." Alicia knelt beside the tub, sleeves rolled up, and began the careful process of helping him wash. Her movements were professional but gentle, and she kept up a steady stream of conversation to ease the intimacy of the moment. "The first time I had to help my grandmother shower, I was terrified," she said, working shampoo through his hair. She was this proud, dignified woman who'd raised 5 children and worked her whole life, and suddenly she needed help with the most basic things. "How did you handle it?" I asked her to tell me stories while I helped. About her childhood, her first job, how she met my grandfather. Alicia's fingers worked gently against his scalp, and she felt him relax incrementally. By the time we were done, I didn't see someone who needed help. I saw the woman who'd taught me to braid my hair and make cornbread from scratch. Noah was quiet for a moment. "What happened to her?" "Pneumonia, 2 winters ago. She went peacefully, but I miss her every day." "I'm sorry." She lived a full life. 93 years of loving fiercely and speaking her mind. Alicia smiled, reaching for the handheld shower head. "She would have liked you." "How could you possibly know that?" "Because she always said the measure of a person wasn't what happened to them, but how they chose to respond. And despite everything you've been through, you're still here. Still fighting. Still making beautiful music." She began rinsing his hair, warm water cascading over his shoulders. She would have respected that. When Alicia moved to wash his back, her hands gentle but sure against his skin, Noah made a soft sound, part relief, part something deeper. "I can feel that," he said quietly. "Your back, your hands, the warmth." I'd started to think. He swallowed hard. "The sensation doesn't stop exactly where the paralysis begins. There are places where I can still feel touch, feel warmth." I'd forgotten. The intimacy of the moment wrapped around them like steam. Alicia's hands stilled on his shoulders, suddenly aware of the shift in the air between them. This was no longer just about dignity or independence. Something else was building, something that made her pulse quicken. "Noah," she said softly. He turned to look at her, water droplets clinging to his lashes, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "Want? Need?" And underneath it all, a question he was afraid to ask. "I know this is complicated," he said, voice rough. "I know I have no right to feel what I'm feeling." "What are you feeling?" "Like I want to kiss you more than I want to breathe." The admission seemed to surprise him. "And like I have absolutely nothing to offer you in return." Alicia's heart hammered against her ribs. Every logical part of her mind screamed warnings. He was her employer. This was wildly inappropriate. She barely knew him despite their growing connection. But logic had never stood a chance against the pull she felt toward this man. "What if I told you that you're wrong?" she whispered, leaning closer. "What if I told you that you've already given me more than you know?" "Alicia." She silenced him by leaning forward and pressing her lips to his, soft and tentative and perfect. For a heartbeat, he was frozen. Then his hand came up to cup her face, fingers threading through her hair, and he kissed her back with a hunger that spoke of months of isolation and longing. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Noah rested his forehead against hers. "This is insane," he murmured. "Completely," she agreed. "I'm your boss. Technically, Margaret is my boss. I'm paralyzed." "I noticed." She smiled, thumb brushing across his cheekbone. "Doesn't change anything, doesn't it?" His voice carried years of doubt, of believing himself diminished. "Noah Davis," she said firmly, "you are brilliant, talented, beautiful, and yes, complicated. But you are not broken, and you are not less than whole. And if you think your disability changes how I feel about you, then you don't understand the first thing about love." The word hung between them, shocking in its honesty. Love. When had that happened? When had affection become something deeper, more vital? "You love me?" His voice was wonderstruck, disbelieving. "I'm falling in love with you," she corrected, heart hammering at her own boldness. "Has been happening since the first time I heard you play. Solidified the moment you let me see you as you really are." Noah stared at her, something transforming in his expression. Hope, fragile and beautiful and terrifying. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be what you need. Then we'll figure it out together." She kissed him again, slower this time, savoring the taste of possibility. "One day at a time. Have you ever had to overcome your own fears to help someone you care about? Share a time when love gave you courage you didn't know you had?" When they finally emerged from the bathroom, Noah in his wheelchair, hair damp, looking more alive than he had in months. The late afternoon sun was painting everything golden. For the first time in 3 years, Noah Davis felt like he might actually have a future worth living. Neither of them noticed Margaret Whitfield standing at the end of the hallway, her expression unreadable as she watched the woman she'd hired to clean floors help a broken man remember how to hope. The knock on Noah's bedroom door came at precisely 6 a.m. the next morning, sharp and authoritative. Alicia, who had fallen asleep in the armchair beside his bed after hours of quiet conversation, jolted awake to find Margaret Whitfield standing in the doorway like an avenging angel. "Ms. Brown." The head housekeeper's voice could have frozen fire. "A word." Noah stirred, consciousness returning slowly until he registered the tension crackling in the air. "Margaret, whatever you think. Mr. Davis, with all due respect, I believe this conversation should be between Ms. Brown and myself." Margaret's smile was arctic. "Staff matters, you understand." Alicia's stomach dropped, but she stood with as much dignity as she could muster. Her hair was mussed from sleep, her dress wrinkled from spending the night in the chair, and she was acutely aware how this must look to someone who didn't understand what had actually transpired. "Of course," she said quietly, following Margaret from the room, but not before catching Noah's eye. The worry there mirrored her own. Margaret led her to the small office off the kitchen where household business was conducted, a sterile space that smelled of disinfectant and disappointment. She closed the door with deliberate precision before turning to face Alicia. 3 weeks, Margaret said, settling behind her desk like a judge taking the bench. 3 weeks, and you've managed to completely compromise your position here. Mrs. Whitfield. Ms. Brown, I've been managing this household for 15 years. I've seen every type of opportunist you can imagine try to take advantage of Mr. Davis's situation. The difference is, most of them had the decency to wait longer than a month. The accusation hit like a physical blow. You think I'm trying to take advantage of him? I think you're a young woman who sees dollar signs when she looks at a vulnerable, wealthy man. Margaret's tone was matter-of-fact, which made it somehow worse. I think you've calculated exactly how to present yourself as his savior. That's not, isn't it? Margaret pulled out a tablet, swiping to what appeared to be a background check. Alicia Brown, 26 years old. Grew up in public housing. 3 younger siblings. Mother worked multiple minimum wage jobs. No college degree. Recently unemployed for 3 months before accepting this position. Each fact felt like a small violence, reducing her life to bullet points that painted her as exactly the kind of person Margaret thought she was. You see a man isolated from the world, dependent on staff, and you position yourself as the one person who truly understands him. Margaret's voice remained professionally neutral. It's textbook manipulation. You're wrong. Alicia's voice was quiet but firm. You're completely wrong. Am I? Then explain to me how, in less than a month, you've gone from cleaning his house to sleeping in his bedroom. I fell asleep in a chair after we talked. Nothing inappropriate happened. Ms. Brown, I saw you coming out of that bathroom yesterday afternoon. I saw how you looked at each other. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is merely friendship. Heat flooded Alicia's cheeks, but she held Margaret's gaze. You're right. It's not just friendship, but it's also not what you think it is. Then enlighten me. Alicia took a breath, choosing her words carefully. I care about him. Genuinely, deeply care about him. Not because of his money or this house, or what he might be able to give me. Because of who he is, his intelligence, his humor, his talent, his courage in facing each day despite everything he's lost. How convenient that the person you've fallen for happens to be worth 9 figures. The dismissive tone sparked something fierce in Alicia's chest. Do you know what I did before this job? I worked at a community center in Tacoma, helping at-risk teenagers learn life skills. I made barely above minimum wage, and I loved every minute of it because I was making a difference in people's lives. Margaret's expression didn't change. I didn't take this job to find a husband or a meal ticket. I took it because I needed work and I'm good at what I do. What happened between Noah and me? That wasn't planned. It wasn't calculated. It just was. Mr. Davis, Margaret corrected sharply. You will refer to your employer with appropriate respect. He asked me to call him Noah, which should have been your first warning that boundaries were being crossed inappropriately. Alicia stared at this woman, who seemed determined to reduce everything beautiful about the previous day to something sordid and manipulative. What exactly are you accusing me of? I'm not accusing you of anything, Ms. Brown. I'm terminating your employment, effective immediately. The words hit like a physical blow. You can't. I absolutely can. You violated the most basic tenets of professional behavior. You entered Mr. Davis's private quarters without permission, engaged in inappropriate physical contact with your employer, and created a situation that puts both him and this household at risk. At risk of what? Margaret's expression softened slightly, and for the first time, Alicia glimpsed something like genuine concern beneath the steel. Ms. Brown, Mr. Davis has been through unimaginable trauma. The accident, the disability, the loss of his career, it broke something fundamental in him. For 3 years, we've been slowly, carefully helping him rebuild some semblance of stability. And you think I'm threatening that? I think you're a complication he doesn't need. Margaret's voice carried a note of weary sadness. Mr. Davis is vulnerable in ways you can't possibly understand. He's isolated, dependent, struggling with depression and self-worth. In that state, any kindness feels like love, any attention feels like salvation. The words twisted in Alicia's chest because somewhere underneath the accusation, she heard a grain of truth she didn't want to acknowledge. Was Noah's attraction to her genuine, or was she simply the first person in years to see him as something other than an object of pity? You don't know him like I do, Alicia said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. I've known him since he was a child, Ms. Brown. His parents were dear friends of mine before they passed. I watched him grow up, watched him fall in love with music, watched him build a career that brought joy to thousands of people. And I watched that accident destroy not just his body, but his faith in himself and his future. Margaret stood, moving to the window that overlooked the gardens where Alicia had once commented on the roses. Do you know why he doesn't leave this house? Why he won't see friends, won't take visitors, won't even consider the possibility of resuming any kind of public life? Alicia shook her head. Because the last time he tried, about a year after the accident, he went to a restaurant with his physical therapist. Someone recognized him, took pictures, posted them online with comments about how tragic it was to see the once great Noah Davis reduced to a wheelchair. Margaret's voice tightened. The story went viral. Fallen star, they called him. From concert halls to wheels. The cruelty of it made Alicia's stomach turn. He came home that day, and didn't speak for 2 weeks. Didn't play, didn't eat unless forced, barely slept. That's when he fired his entire care team and decided isolation was safer than risking that kind of humiliation again. But that's not living, Alicia protested. That's just existing. It's surviving. And sometimes that's enough. Margaret turned back to face her. What happens when the novelty wears off, Ms. Brown? When the reality of his limitations becomes not romantic, but restrictive? When you realize that loving someone with his level of disability means a lifetime of adaptations, limitations, and yes, caregiving responsibilities that go far beyond what you experienced yesterday. The question lodged like a splinter in Alicia's mind. She wanted to protest, to insist that her feelings were deeper than Margaret understood, but doubt crept in around the edges. I think you care about him, Margaret continued, her voice gentler now. I even think your feelings are genuine, as far as they go. But caring about someone and being able to handle the reality of their life are two very different things. You're not giving me a chance to prove you wrong, because the cost of being wrong is too high. Margaret returned to her desk, pulling out a manila envelope. Your final paycheck, plus 2 weeks severance. There's also the number for a placement agency that specializes in domestic positions. I'll provide a neutral reference. Alicia stared at the envelope, her hands shaking slightly. What if I refuse to go? Then I'll have security escort you from the premises, and you'll leave with nothing but the clothes on your back. The threat was delivered calmly, but Alicia heard the steel beneath it. Margaret Whitfield had been protecting Noah Davis long before Alicia arrived, and she'd continue doing so long after she was gone. Does he know? Alicia asked quietly. Not yet, but he will. And you'll tell him. What? That I quit? That I was only after his money? I'll tell him the truth. That you're a lovely young woman who found herself in an impossible situation and made the reasonable choice to pursue opportunities that better match your qualifications and life goals. It was a kind lie, Alicia realized. One that would let Noah keep whatever dignity the relationship had restored to him while removing the complications she represented. Can I say goodbye? I think a clean break would be best for everyone involved. Alicia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of dreams she'd barely allowed herself to acknowledge crumbling around her. For less than 24 hours, she'd allowed herself to imagine a future that apparently she'd never really had a right to claim. He's going to think I abandoned him, she said, the words barely audible. He'll survive. He's stronger than you think. But as Alicia took the envelope and walked toward the door, she wondered if Margaret was wrong about that. She'd seen the fear in Noah's eyes yesterday, the terror of being left behind by someone else who mattered. How would he interpret her sudden disappearance? She paused at the threshold. Mrs. Whitfield? Yes. You love him too. I can see that. But love isn't always about protection. Sometimes it's about taking risks, even when they're scary. Margaret's expression remained impassive. Sometimes, Ms. Brown, love is about knowing when to step aside. 20 minutes later, Alicia walked through the ornate iron gates of the Davis estate for the last time, her small bag of personal items feeling impossibly heavy. Behind her, she could hear the faint sound of piano music drifting from the upper floors, a melody so heartbreaking it made her steps falter. It was Chopin again, but this time, the notes seemed to carry not just melancholy but active grief, as if Noah had somehow already sensed the loss coming. Alicia climbed into her aging Honda Civic and sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, tears finally coming. She'd known Margaret was right about some things. The relationship was complicated, the obstacles real, the potential for heartbreak enormous. But she'd also known something Margaret hadn't seen. The way Noah's eyes had lit up when he talked about music, the gentle strength in his hands when he'd touched her face, the courage it had taken for him to trust her with his vulnerability. That man, the real Noah Davis, not the victim or the patient or the recluse, deserved better than a life of careful protection. He deserved the chance to choose his own risks, his own happiness, his own heartbreak if that's what it came to. As she drove away from the only place that had felt like home in months, Alicia made a decision that would have terrified her 24 hours earlier. She wasn't giving up. Not on Noah, not on what they'd found together, and not on the possibility that love, real, complicated, imperfect love, might be worth fighting for. But first, she had to figure out how to fight a battle when the person she was fighting for didn't even know war had been declared. Have you ever had to choose between playing it safe and fighting for something you believed in? What would you do in Alicia's situation? Accept defeat or find a way to fight back? The piano music followed her for miles, a haunting reminder of everything she'd found and lost in the space of a single, perfect, impossible day. Noah knew something was wrong the moment he heard Margaret's footsteps in the hallway. They were too measured, too careful, the walk of someone preparing to deliver bad news. He'd been expecting Alicia for the past hour, their morning routine now as essential to him as breathing, but instead, he got Margaret's diplomatic knock. "Mr. Davis? May I come in? Where's Alicia?" The question came out sharper than he'd intended. Margaret entered, her expression carefully neutral in a way that immediately set his teeth on edge. "I'm afraid Ms. Brown has decided to pursue other opportunities. She submitted her resignation and left this morning." The words hit him like a physical blow. "She what? I know this may come as a surprise, but—" "No." Noah's hands gripped his wheelchair's armrests, so tightly his knuckles went white. "No, that's not possible. She wouldn't just leave without saying goodbye. I'm afraid she felt it would be easier this way." Margaret's tone carried practiced sympathy. "A clean break," she said. "You're lying." The accusation hung in the air between them. Margaret's expression flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. "Mr. Davis, I understand you may have developed feelings for Ms. Brown, but—" "Stop." The word came out like a whip crack. "Just stop with the careful language and the diplomatic bullshit, Margaret. What really happened?" For 15 years, Margaret Whitfield had managed to navigate Noah's moods, his family's dramas, and the delicate balance of running a household for people who could buy and sell entire companies. But something in Noah's voice now, a steel she hadn't heard since before the accident, made her recalculate her approach. She was unsuitable, Margaret said finally. Her behavior was inappropriate, unprofessional. I had no choice but to terminate her employment. Her behavior? Noah's voice was dangerously quiet. What behavior would that be exactly? The intimacy, the boundary violations. You mean caring about me? The words exploded from him with a fury that made Margaret take a step back. You mean treating me like a human being instead of a fragile antique to be dusted and maintained? Mr. Davis, please try to understand. No, you understand. Noah propelled his wheelchair forward, eyes blazing. For 3 years, I've been buried alive in this house. I stopped living, stopped hoping, stopped believing I had anything to offer another person. And then Alicia walked into my life and made me remember what it felt like to be alive. She was taking advantage. She was falling in love with me. The admission ripped from his throat, raw and desperate. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To have someone see all of this, he gestured at his body, his chair, his limitations, and still choose to stay. Margaret's expression softened slightly. Noah, darling, you're vulnerable. It's understandable that you might misinterpret. Don't you dare. His voice dropped to a whisper, more menacing than any shout. Don't you dare tell me I'm too damaged to know the difference between pity and love. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? Isn't that exactly what you've been telling yourself for 3 years? That I'm too broken to make my own decisions, too fragile to handle my own life, too pathetic to deserve real happiness. The words hit their mark. Margaret's carefully composed mask slipped, revealing the fear beneath. I've watched you try to kill yourself with neglect, she said, voice cracking slightly. Refusing therapy, refusing visitors, refusing to engage with anything that might bring you joy. I've watched you disappear a little more each day, and yes, I've done everything in my power to keep you safe, because losing you completely would destroy me. The honesty in her admission gave Noah pause, but only for a moment. Safe, he repeated. Safe from what? From living? From risking my heart? From the possibility that someone might actually want to build a life with me? From being hurt again? From being used, abandoned, pitted? From being human? Noah's voice carried a finality that made Margaret's breath catch. You've been keeping me safe from being human. He turned his wheelchair toward the door. Where are you going? To find her. Noah, wait. No. He paused at the threshold, not turning around. For 3 years, I've let you make decisions for me because I was too broken to make them myself. But I'm not that person anymore. Alicia helped me remember who I used to be, who I could still be. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let you take that away from both of us. If you leave this house, then I leave. The simplicity of the statement was devastating. I've been dead for 3 years, Margaret. Dead and preserved in amber, while you've tried to keep me safe from a world that might hurt me. But you know what? The world already did its worst. The accident, the paralysis, the end of my career. I survived all of it. What I can't survive is a life without hope. Margaret stood frozen as Noah wheeled himself from the room. The sound of his chair on marble, the only noise in the suddenly cavernous house. Alicia had made it exactly 36 hours. 36 hours of telling herself Margaret was right, that she was being practical, that walking away was the mature thing to do. 36 hours of staring at her phone, wanting to call him, but not having his number. 36 hours of replaying every moment in that bathroom, every word they'd exchanged, every touch that had promised something neither of them had dared to name. She was sitting in her small apartment in Tacoma, mechanically eating cereal for the 3rd meal in a row, when her phone rang. Unknown number, Seattle area code. Hello, Alicia. The voice was rough, desperate, achingly familiar. Noah. She dropped the spoon, milk splashing across her small kitchen table. How did you get my number? I may be paralyzed, but I'm not helpless. Though it did take considerable charm to convince the placement agency to give me your contact information. Despite everything, she smiled. And where exactly are you calling from? The parking lot of your apartment building. Alicia's heart stopped. You're here? I'm here. And I'd very much like to see you, if you're willing. She was moving before conscious thought kicked in, abandoning her cereal and running for the door. She took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting through the building's front entrance to find Noah's sleek black Tesla parked near the entrance, its back door open to reveal a wheelchair ramp. He was sitting in his chair beside the car, wearing dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look impossibly deep. His hair was windblown, his expression uncertain but determined, and he was quite possibly the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Hi, he said quietly. Hi yourself. She approached slowly, afraid that moving too quickly might make him disappear. This is a surprise. Good surprise or restraining order surprise? Definitely good. She stopped just out of arm's reach, drinking in the sight of him. Though I have to ask, how did you even find me? Private investigator. Turns out when you're wealthy and determined, people become remarkably helpful. His expression grew serious. Margaret told me you quit. Margaret fired me. I know. The simple acknowledgement carried volumes. She also told me why. Alicia's stomach dropped. Noah, whatever she said. She said you were taking advantage of me. That you saw a vulnerable, wealthy man and calculated the best way to manipulate him into caring about you. His voice remained steady, but she could see the pain in his eyes. She said I was too damaged to know the difference between genuine affection and opportunism. The words hung between them like a challenge. Alicia felt her throat close with emotion. And what do you think? She asked quietly. I think Margaret has been protecting me for so long she's forgotten I'm not made of glass. Noah reached out, his fingers finding hers. I think she's terrified of losing the only family she has left, so she's been keeping me in a beautiful prison where nothing can hurt me, including happiness. Alicia's eyes filled with tears. Noah, I also think, he continued, thumb brushing across her knuckles, that you are the bravest, most beautiful, most genuine person I've ever met. And that what happened between us yesterday was the first real thing I've felt in 3 years. The tears spilled over then, hot and relieving. I was so scared you'd believe her, that you'd think I was just. Never. The word was fierce, certain. I may have lost the use of my legs, but my heart works just fine. And my heart knows the difference between someone who wants to use me and someone who wants to love me. He tugged gently on her hand, pulling her closer until she was kneeling beside his chair, their faces level. "The question is," he said softly, "do you still want to love me? Even knowing it's going to be complicated and difficult, and probably involve more battles with well-meaning people who think they know what's best for us." Alicia cupped his face in her free hand, thumb tracing the line of his cheekbone. "Noah Davis, I fell in love with you when you were just a voice through a door. Everything since then has just been confirmation." The kiss was different this time. Deeper, more certain, flavored with relief and promise, and the particular sweetness of almost losing something precious. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Noah rested his forehead against hers. "Come home with me," he said. "Your house isn't my home. Then help me make it ours." The words were a proposal wrapped in a question, and Alicia felt her heart expand until it filled her entire chest. "What about Margaret? Margaret and I need to have a long overdue conversation about boundaries and respect, and the difference between caring for someone and controlling their life." His expression grew determined. "But that's my fight to have, not yours. I don't want to come between you and Alicia." He silenced her with another soft kiss. "You're not coming between anything. You're offering me a future I thought I'd lost forever. If Margaret can't accept that, if she can't accept you, then she's the one choosing to create distance." Alicia studied his face, seeing not just the man who'd been broken by tragedy, but the man who was choosing to rebuild himself on his own terms. "Are you sure about this? About us? Because once I come home with you, I'm not going anywhere." Noah's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. "Promise? Promise." The ride back to the estate was charged with anticipation and nervous energy. Noah had dismissed his driver, handling the specialized controls of his vehicle with a competence that reminded Alicia he was far more capable than anyone, including himself, usually gave him credit for. "I should probably mention," he said as they pulled through the iron gates, "that I may have told Margaret exactly what I thought of her decision-making process." "How exactly?" "Let's just say I haven't spoken to anyone that forcefully since before my accident." It felt liberating. Alicia squeezed his hand where it rested on the gear shift. "I'm proud of you. For yelling at the woman who's taken care of me for 15 years. For standing up for yourself. For us. For the life you want instead of the life other people think you should have." They found Margaret in the kitchen, her usual composure cracked around the edges. She looked up when they entered, her gaze moving from Noah to Alicia and back again. "I see you found her," she said quietly. "We found each other," Noah replied. "Margaret, I need you to understand something. Alicia isn't going anywhere. She's going to be living here, with me, as the woman I love. You can accept that and continue to be part of our family, or you can choose to make this difficult. But either way, it's happening." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, the first crack in her armor Alicia had ever seen. "I was trying to protect you," she whispered. "I know." Noah's voice gentled. "And I love you for it. But I don't need protection anymore. I need support. I need someone who believes I'm strong enough to handle whatever comes, including heartbreak, if that's what the future holds." "She could leave," Margaret said, the words barely audible. "She could break your heart and leave you worse than before." "She could," Noah agreed. "Or she could stay, and we could build something beautiful together. The only way to find out is to try." Margaret looked at Alicia then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "I was wrong," she said finally. "Not about everything. There will be challenges, complications that you can't imagine yet. But I was wrong about your intentions. I can see it now, the way you look at him. You see him as whole." "He is whole," Alicia said simply. "He's brilliant and talented and kind, and yes, he uses a wheelchair. But that's not what defines him, any more than my background defines me." Margaret nodded slowly. "I owe you both an apology. And Noah, I owe you your independence. I should have given it back to you long ago." The three of them stood in the kitchen, where just 2 days ago Margaret had delivered ultimatums, and something shifted. Not quite forgiveness yet, but the possibility of it. "There's something else," Noah said, his hand finding Alicia's. "I've made some decisions. About the house, about my life, about what I want moving forward. Oh, I'm going to start playing again. Publicly." The announcement sent a shock through the room. I want to give a concert. Here, in the music room. Invite some of my old colleagues, some press maybe. Show the world that Noah Davis isn't dead, just different. Margaret's hand went to her throat. Noah, are you certain? After what happened last time. Last time I was trying to pretend nothing had changed. This time, I'm going to celebrate what I've gained instead of mourning what I lost. He squeezed Alicia's hand. And I'd like you to be my guest of honor. Alicia's heart soared. You want me to be there? I want you to be everywhere. Every concert, every appearance, every moment of this new life we're building. He lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. If you'll have me. Noah Davis, she said, voice thick with emotion. I will have you any way I can get you, for as long as you'll let me. The kiss that followed was interrupted by Margaret clearing her throat, but when they broke apart, the older woman was smiling through her tears. Well then, she said briskly, I suppose we have a concert to plan. As the three of them began discussing logistics and guest lists and the thousand small details of rebuilding a life, Alicia felt something she'd never experienced before. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The music room would soon be filled with people again. The house would echo with laughter instead of silence, and Noah Davis would take his place in the world not as a victim or a recluse, but as a man who had faced the worst life could offer and chosen joy anyway. But first there was tonight. Their first real night together, with nothing between them but possibility and the kind of love that transforms even the most broken places into home. 3 months later, the music room had been transformed. What was once Noah's private sanctuary, a space where he'd hidden from the world behind closed doors and drawn curtains, now blazed with warm light from crystal chandeliers. 50 chairs arranged in intimate rows faced the magnificent Steinway, their occupants a carefully curated mixture of music critics, former colleagues, and society figures who had once counted Noah among their brightest stars. Alicia stood at the back of the room, her hands smoothed nervously over the midnight blue silk dress Noah had insisted on buying her. You'll be the most beautiful woman there, he'd said when she protested the extravagance. I want everyone to know how lucky I am. Now, watching him in his tailored black suit seated at the piano bench, she thought luck had nothing to do with it. This was courage in its purest form. The choice to be vulnerable in public, to risk judgment and pity, and the cruel comments that had driven him into exile 3 years ago. Margaret appeared at her elbow, resplendent in deep purple, and wearing an expression of fierce pride. He's been preparing for this moment since he was 5 years old, she murmured. Even before the accident, I never saw him more nervous than he is right now. How can you tell? The way he's adjusting his tie. He's done it 6 times in the last minute. Indeed, Noah's hand had moved to his collar again, fingers working the silk with unconscious precision. But when his eyes found Alicia's across the room, his face transformed. The anxiety melted away, replaced by something that made her heart flutter against her ribs. Love. Pure, uncomplicated, radiant love. He'd chosen to open with Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the piece he'd been playing the day she first heard him through the walls. But where those early performances had been suffused with melancholy and loss, tonight's opening notes carried something entirely different. Hope. The melody unfolded like a conversation between Noah's 2 selves, the man he'd been before the accident and the man he'd become since. Pain and joy wove together in complex harmonies, each phrase building towards something larger than either alone could achieve. Alicia found herself holding her breath as his fingers danced across the keys with a precision that seemed impossible. This wasn't just technical mastery, though it was certainly that. This was storytelling of the highest order, each note weighted with lived experience and hard-won wisdom. The audience sat transfixed. Critics who had come prepared to write compassionate reviews about a fallen star's brave attempt at comeback found themselves witnessing something far more powerful. Artistic transcendence that rendered physical limitations irrelevant. When the final notes faded into silence, the applause erupted with a force that made the chandeliers tremble. But Noah's eyes remained fixed on Alicia, his smile radiating a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying easily through the acoustically perfect room. 3 years ago, I thought my story was over. I believed that losing the use of my legs meant losing everything that defined me. My career, my purpose, my identity. The room fell silent, hanging on his every word. I was wrong. His gaze never left Alicia's face. What I actually lost was fear. Fear of being seen as different, fear of being judged, fear of reaching for happiness and failing to grasp it. Tonight, I want to share with you not just my music, but the love that brought me back to life. The rest of the concert passed in a blur of transcendent beauty. Noah performed pieces that spanned his entire repertoire, classical standards that showcased his technical brilliance, jazz arrangements that revealed his creative evolution, and finally, a piece he'd composed himself in the weeks leading up to tonight. "This is called Alicia's Song," he announced, fingers already finding the opening chord. "It's a love letter written in notes instead of words." The melody was unlike anything he'd played before. Intimate, sensual, building to passionate crescendos before settling into tender whispers that seemed to caress the air itself. It was musical seduction, a sonic translation of every moment they'd shared since that first conversation through his bedroom door. When the final note faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Later, after the last guest had departed and Margaret had tactfully retired to her quarters, Noah and Alicia found themselves alone in the music room. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, turning everything silver and dreamlike. "Come here," Noah said softly, patting the piano bench beside him. Alicia settled next to him, their thighs touching, her hand finding his on the keys. "That was incredible," she whispered. "You were incredible. I've never played better in my life." His voice carried wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe what had transpired. "Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because for the first time since the accident, I wasn't playing to prove I could still do it. I was playing to share something beautiful with the person I love." He turned to face her fully, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. The touch was electric, charged with 3 months of growing intimacy and the particular intensity of tonight's triumph. "Alicia Brown," he said, voice rough with emotion, "you saved my life." "Noah, not just today. Every day since you walked into this house and refused to let me disappear." His thumb traced across her cheekbone. "You saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed." The kiss began soft, reverent, but quickly deepened as months of carefully contained passion finally found its release. Alicia's arms wound around his neck, fingers threading through his hair as she pressed closer. "I love you," she breathed against his lips. "I love your talent, your courage, your stubborn refusal to give up even when everything seemed hopeless." "Show me," he whispered, and the need in his voice made her pulse quicken. She stood, taking his hand and leading him toward the door. They moved through the moonlit house in comfortable silence, the evening's triumph settling around them like a shared blanket. In his bedroom, their bedroom now, candles flickered on the nightstand, filling the space with warm, golden light. Noah had planned this, she realized, had prepared for this moment when they would finally celebrate not just tonight's victory, but everything they'd built together. "Are you certain?" he asked as she began working the buttons of his shirt. "Once we cross this line." "We crossed that line months ago," she said, pushing the fabric from his shoulders and pressing her lips to the hollow of his throat. "We crossed it the moment you trusted me enough to let me see you as you really are." The lovemaking that followed was a revelation in vulnerability and trust. Noah's hands mapped every curve of her body with reverent attention, while her touch helped him rediscover sensation and pleasure he'd thought lost forever. There was an exquisite tenderness to their joining, each caress a conversation about boundaries and desires, each kiss a promise of acceptance and devotion. When Noah discovered he could still experience pleasure, different perhaps than before, but no less intense for the change, the wonder in his eyes made Alicia's heart soar. They moved together with increasing urgency, finding rhythms that worked for both of them, creating an intimacy that transcended any physical limitations. Afterward, they lay entwined in the massive bed, Alicia's head on Noah's chest, his fingers combing through her hair in long, soothing strokes. "I have something for you," he said eventually, reaching for the nightstand drawer. "Noah, you don't need to give me anything. I want to." He pulled out a small velvet box, his hands shaking slightly as he opened it. Inside nestled a ring unlike anything Alicia had ever seen. A vintage Art Deco design, with a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the candlelight and threw it back in brilliant fractals. "It was my grandmother's," Noah said quietly. "She always said it should go to the woman who taught her grandson how to love fearlessly." Alicia's breath caught. "Noah, I know it's fast. I know we haven't been together long by conventional standards. But the accident taught me something valuable about time. We don't get to know how much we have, so we shouldn't waste what we're given." He took her left hand, thumb brushing across her ring finger. "Marry me, Alicia. Help me turn this house into a home. Build a life with me that honors both our dreams." The proposal was everything she'd dreamed of, and nothing she'd expected. Spontaneous yet clearly considered, romantic but grounded in the reality of who they were together. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." The ring slipped onto her finger, as if it had been made for her, the emerald catching the light like captured starfire. When Noah kissed her again, it tasted like promises and new beginnings, and the particular sweetness of choosing love despite all the reasons fear might suggest otherwise. 6 months later, the estate buzzed with activity as wedding preparations reached their final crescendo. Margaret, who had thrown herself into planning with the efficiency of a 4-star general, directed vendors with crisp authority, while somehow managing to look sentimental about the entire affair. "Flowers to the East Terrace," she called, checking items off her extensive list. "And someone please ensure the string quartet understands they're to transition seamlessly from the processional to Mr. Davis's composition." Alicia, radiant in a gown that Margaret had insisted on commissioning from Milan, watched the controlled chaos from the music room, where she and Noah were stealing a private moment before the ceremony. "Having second thoughts?" he teased, though his eyes held a flicker of genuine concern. "Only about whether we ordered enough champagne," she replied, adjusting his boutonniere with gentle fingers. "Margaret's guest list grew again this morning. She's excited. I don't think she ever expected to plan a wedding in this house. Are you nervous?" Noah considered the question seriously. "About marrying you? Not even slightly. About having this many people staring at us while we do it? Moderately terrified." Alicia laughed, the sound carrying all the joy and confidence that had become her signature in the months since moving in. "You just performed for 50 critics and received 3 standing ovations. I think you can handle saying, 'I do' in front of our families." "Our families," Noah repeated, voice soft with wonder. "I like the sound of that." The ceremony itself was everything they'd dreamed. Intimate despite the crowd, elegant without being ostentatious, filled with music and laughter, and the particular magic of 2 people who had found each other against all odds. When Noah played Alicia down the aisle on a piece he'd composed specifically for the moment, there wasn't a dry eye in the assembled crowd. When they exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about choosing each other daily, about facing whatever challenges came with united hearts, about building a love that honored both their journeys. Even the most cynical guests found themselves believing in fairy tales again. The reception spilled from the ballroom onto terraces overlooking Puget Sound, where sunset painted everything gold and pink and impossibly romantic. Noah and Alicia's first dance was to a jazz arrangement of Alicia's song, performed by a quartet that included 2 of Noah's former Juilliard classmates. "Any regrets?" Noah asked as they swayed together, her emerald engagement ring catching the last rays of sunlight. "Only that it took us so long to find each other," Alicia replied, then smiled. "Though I suppose we found each other exactly when we were supposed to, when we were ready to be found, when we were brave enough to let ourselves be seen." As the evening progressed and their guests celebrated around them, Noah and Alicia found quiet moments to simply exist in their happiness. They were no longer the broken billionaire and the determined cleaner who had first encountered each other through a locked door. They were partners, equals, 2 people who had chosen to build something beautiful from the raw materials of trust and courage and love. Later, as the last guests departed and Margaret began orchestrating the cleanup with characteristic efficiency, Noah and Alicia stood on the terrace overlooking the water. The house glowed behind them, warm and welcoming, and utterly transformed from the mausoleum it had once been. "So," Noah said, pulling her closer against the evening chill, "what's next for Mr. and Mrs. Davis?" "Everything," Alicia replied, leaning into his warmth. "Tours, if you want them. Children, when we're ready. Growing old together, and probably driving Margaret completely insane in the process." "Sounds perfect." "It does, doesn't it?" They stood in comfortable silence, watching the lights of Seattle twinkle across the water, both thinking about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. The pain, the fear, the gradual building of trust that had blossomed into something neither of them had dared to hope for. "Noah," Alicia said eventually. Thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to let me love you. For trusting me with your heart when you'd already had it broken. For showing me what it means to choose joy even when the world seems determined to offer only sorrow." Noah turned to face her fully, hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "Alicia Davis," he said, voice rich with emotion. "Thank you for saving me from a life I didn't realize I was settling for. Thank you for showing me that healing isn't about going back to who we were. It's about having the courage to become who we're meant to be." The kiss they shared overlooked the place where their separate stories had become one. Two people who had found in each other not just love, but the reminder that every ending is also a beginning, and that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from learning to play a new song entirely. Behind them, the house that had once been a prison had become a sanctuary, and in the years to come, it would echo not with silence and sorrow, but with music and laughter and the everyday miracles of two hearts that had learned to beat in perfect harmony. In the end, it wasn't the grand gesture or the public triumph that mattered most, though those had their place. It was the quiet moments, the daily choice to see each other whole, and the radical act of building a love that made both of them braver than they'd ever imagined possible. The cleaner and the paralyzed billionaire had become simply Noah and Alicia, two people who had dared to love without reservation and discovered that sometimes the most broken places make the strongest foundations for building something beautiful.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.